So guys, welcome back to Remove Before Race, and today is all about this very special car. It is a left field entrant into the sports sedan market, and it is Alfa Romeo's new Giulia Quadrifoglio. But what does the Quadrifoglio badge, the four-leaf clover, signify? Is it just a badge of good luck? That's partly true, but it has origins in a sad legend that I was not aware of, and I want to fill you guys in. But to talk about it, we have to go back in the past a little and talk about a certain gentleman whose name you may have heard of, Enzo Ferrari. Yes, that Ferrari. Now, Enzo was not always as successful as you may think from his name. At one point, Enzo was broke, and he was at his favorite watering hole where he met a fellow petrolhead called Ugo Savocci. Now, Enzo and Savocci got on like a house on fire. So eventually, when Enzo left to join Alfa Romeo, Savocci came along with him, and together they formed Alfa Romeo's first factory racing team alongside Giuseppe Camari and Antonio Ascari. And the four of them together were Alfa Romeo's first factory racing team. Now, Savocci was a great racer, but he always had an air of bad luck about him. He couldn't quite take pole position. But in 1923, at the Targa Florio, he came up with a new idea. He said he's going to give himself some good luck. So he put a logo on his Alfa racing car, which was the four-leaf clover, the Quadrifoglio. And it sat inside a 4-point diamond, which symbolized the four racing drivers from the factory. And as you can imagine, the rest is legend. He won that race, and ever since, we've had this Quadrifoglio badge on Alfas. But then you're thinking, why is it now a triangle? Sadly, a year later, Savocci died. And as a testament to this great friendship and this team spirit that was built by this point, they removed one of the points, and now it is the triangle with the Quadrifoglio within it to symbolize this part of Alfa's rich racing history. And now the Quadrifoglio badge is only used on the most potent machinations to come out of Alfa Skunk Works, and none is more potent than this Giulia. But beforehand, when I said to you Alfa Romeo, you might think of, say, the smaller hatchbacks, the front-wheel drive cars, or maybe the 4C. But if you ask an Alfa purist, they'll tell you the last great driving saloon from Alfa Romeo was the Alfa C63. Now, that was a special car. It may not have looked like a sports car, but it drove every bit the way that a sports car should for its time. And because of that, it is remembered very fondly. And that is the footsteps that the Giulia means to follow now. And it does. It is a direct competitor to the AMG C63S, the BMW M3, and that is the hottest contested market in the auto industry. But you see, the Giulia also has the power and the specs to match this intent as well. Inside, you will find a V6 turbo engine that's been developed with engineers from Ferrari, and this engine produces 503 brake horsepower and 600 Newton meters of torque. And it apparently shares much in common with a certain Ferrari V8 too. No surprise what with the engineer's involvement, but as you'll see later, it behaves with similar intent too. But let's talk about the looks a little, because a lot of what brings us awe about Alfa Romeo generally, apart from the engines, is the look. And this is a gorgeous, gorgeous looking car. Alfa seem to do things in a way that's just different to what we're used to, certainly in the German design, and that's what makes it so special. The overall look of it, to me, looks smaller than, say, the M3 and the C63, but it's deceitful because they're almost the same size. But it's just the way it looks. It looks squat and powerful and muscular. The front end is signature Alfa Romeo with that grille. You see the movable lower carbon splitter, the larger intakes, the little aerodynamic creases, the nostrils on the engine bonnet. It all looks very purposeful. And it's all immediately recognizable as an Alfa Romeo. But then the side, I really like the side, especially those side sills. Too many of the automakers' side sills, they look exactly the same. And for me, it's these little details that endear me to the car. You can see it pokes out a little bit more towards the front of the car and angles in towards the rear, and it gives the car a really intense looking shape. I really like the look of it. I like the little vent behind the front wheel arch as well. And generally, it just looks, as I said, really muscular. The Quadrifoglio wheels are gorgeous, and the red calipers really match well together with this particular spec. And the side is really finished off by the way it swoops into the rear, and then you see that lovely ducktail spoiler. Now that is a spoiler shape which is really cool. It's devil horned. Now, I've spoken about devil horn spoilers in the past with the C63S and the newer M4, but those came after Alfa did it. Again, the rear diffuser, it's just done in a different way than what the Germans do it. The twin pipes on each side just look different. The recesses that go into the lower part of the diffuser, they're just different. And it just looks more muscular, but yet more elegant. And that is what I'm expecting of an Alfa Romeo. Now, this is one seriously mean looking saloon, but I do wonder then, what would the wagon look like? I love fast wagons, as you guys do. I think it would look pretty damn awesome. But then I suppose Alfa would say there is the Stelvio Quadrifoglio that exists, but I have heard that there's a coupe coming as well. That could look pretty cool, don't you think? Well, this car is small, it's fast, it looks small and fast in the way it's designed as well. But I really want to take a look inside, because I've heard a lot of things inside from other people who've probably never sat in the car. But as always at RBR, let's decide for ourselves. So here we are inside the Giulia Quadrifoglio, and I want you to share your first impression of this interior with me. I often get asked why the channel is called Remove Before Race, and one of the reasons is that you're supposed to remove your preconceptions before you jump in a car and get your first impression. So I want you to do that with me today, because this interior has gotten a lot of slack in the auto press. So I want you guys to come up with your own opinion, as I'm going to do. For me, first impressions are really positive, and this is coming from someone who's done thousands and thousands of miles in the competitor cars, having owned a whole bunch of them. So this is a very hotly contested area, and the interior is very important. And the first thing that I look at always is the driver zone, and I really, really like, first of all, the steering wheel here is gorgeous. It's a very small diameter, it's flat bottomed, we've got carbon, Napa, Alcantara, red stitching, a beautiful start button here, betraying some of its Ferrari engineering, I think, and it all looks really, really premium. You've also got these wonderful shift paddles here in a cold aluminium, and again, very supercar-like, very Ferrari, very sort of what we saw in the DB11 and the DBS. So this is immediately the first thing that gets you. The bit that you are communicating with is gorgeous. I'd love to see an all Alcantara steering wheel, because there is a lot of materials going on here, but this feels really good. And I just love the small diameter of it. It's great, and you'll see later with the steering of this car why that only compounds further. Then you've got the dials in front of you. So if we give this a little fire up. Now, these are part analog, part digital, as you'd see in, say, the M3, M4, in the C63S pre-facelift as well. But these are really, really nice analog dials. They're as nice as they are in the C63. I think they're a lot nicer looking than what you get in the BMW, because these have actually wholly accepted the fact that they are analog. So they're shaped in a really nice way. The dials are nice, the font is nice. It all looks rather like a good looking watch, as I would expect of good analog dials. And in the middle, you've got your digital side as well. Comparing it to the very recently released C63S facelift, of course, the animations and the digital dial there, it's a facelift, it's very up to date. But considering how good this looks, I'd like to see Alfa attempt to do digital dials as well. I think they do a pretty good job of it. Then that brings you on to the rest of the dash. It's all slightly pointing towards the driver, not as exaggerated as in, say, most BMWs, but it's a very ergonomic interior. If you came in here without any knowledge of Alfa Romeo, or not having sat in many before, you wouldn't be alienated. Everything is quite easy to find. You've got all your aircon bits here as you'd expect them. The spec in here is gorgeous, and it helps when you're looking at the whole thing, because you've got black Napa, you've got red on the underside of the dashboard, which I wish we could get in the C63. You don't. This makes it look so much more premium than that car in terms of just this front look that the driver gets, which is the most important part of the car, I would say. So this all flows really nicely. The little round vents on the side I like as well, and the touches of carbon everywhere just look absolutely gorgeous. But then you come to the infotainment screen here. It kind of links onto the speedometer, and you can't quite gather where the edges of the screen are. And it's a very nice way of doing a screen, actually, compared to what we're used to with BMW and Mercedes, where you have an iPad-like screen or something sticking out from the dash. Here, you can't quite perceive where the screen starts and where it finishes. I think it's a very Italian way of doing things, and I quite like it. But the screen is quite small. It seems a little low resolution. One of my friends commented, fellow petrol head, that you almost expect to see 80 Super Mario pop up somewhere in here. I think that's harsh. I think I've used the system, and say if you're coming out of a C63 pre-facelift into this, you're not going to miss any features from that in here. It's got radio, media, phone, nav, etc. All the basic stuff that you expect, and they're easy to find and they're easy to operate. Yes, if you compare it to the facelift of both the M3 and the C63, then those cars have a lot more tech, but it's something for Alfa to work on. I like the center console. You got 2 cup holders here, loads of storage space everywhere. It's a great place to sit in. But my absolute favorite bit of the interior are these absolutely gorgeous seats. These are the Sparco carbon shell sports seats. They're about £3,000, but they are worth every single penny. Just look how gorgeous these seats are. The shape, the design, the carbon, the little embossing of the Alfa Romeo logo. But more than that, it's the way that you feel sitting in them. They're some of the best seats that I've ever sat in. Very reminiscent of the AMG Performance seats that I always rave about. There's loads of adjustability and where you can get the seat, and with the steering wheel, which really gives me the feeling that the guys who engineered this car were very much drivers, very interested in making sure that the driver felt at home in his own position. But yeah, these seats, an absolute must if you ask me. Yes, £3,000 is expensive, but they are not expensive when they give you some of the best seats that you can get in a car today. So I think a lot of this is going to come down to spec. I'm sure if I was sent an all black car inside, maybe without the carbon steering wheel and the seats, I'd probably hate it. But I haven't been sent that. It's been spec correctly. We've got a nice 2-tone interior. We've got all the right options that you should invest in. And the car looks stunning to me. A lot of comparison has been made to the Germans. I'd say it quite easily knocks spots off the BMW, and it's every bit as good as the C63. I maybe even prefer the steering wheel, and this to me is the most important area. There are definitely bits to work on, certainly the infotainment system. I'd like to see a digital display as well, but as far as the look goes, I think it looks good. Jumping in the rear of the Giulia, it's quite interesting when you got the Sparco carbon seats, because it's almost like you're sitting in some kind of track car. It looks really quite special. The seats in the back, you've got loads of headroom, loads and loads of headroom. I'm 5'10", and I'm nice and comfortable in here. Lots of legroom in my driving position as well. Feels really quite roomy in here. The lumbar is perhaps a bit strong on these rear seats, but that's kind of subjective, I think. I think you can spend a lot of time in here and it looks really quite good. Though I would have liked to have seen some kind of glove box or something here for you to stow stuff or cup holders or whatnot. So, drama is a big part of what makes a sports saloon interesting, and sound is a big part of the whole drama side of things. So as in every review of this ilk of car, I like to see what the startup sounds like. Before I get to that, I just want to show you the different driving modes. So normally in a car where you'd have Comfort, Sport, Sport Plus, etc., as we're used to from the Germans, you don't have that in the Alfa Romeo Giulia. You have instead something called DNA, which is really quite cool. So it works like this. You go from A, which is the softest setting, N is a mid-range, D for dynamic is, you can see already, it's red, it denotes sportiness, and then you've got race, which you can flick over to the side as well. So I'm going to start the car up first in D, so we can see what that sounds like. It's a pretty nice and powerful start up in D, certainly. That might have been a cold start actually today. So we will try now, see what A, the other side of the spectrum, sounds like. So A is a bit quieter, as you would expect. We do some revs in it. Sounds like a typical V6 in that mode. If we switch it into D, it sounds almost exactly like A. But if we pop it now into race mode, you can hear the flaps open. That sounds good. But the problem with that is, the flaps, yes, they open in race, but also your collision detection goes off, your ESP goes off. So it's not exactly the safest mode to be driving in all the time if you want all the sound. It would have been nice, and I think it's something to work on in the next model, to have an exhaust flap button as most cars have these days. So if you want to drive in D, N or A with the flaps open light race, you can do that. So that's something definitely to work on, because I tend to do that in most of the other cars as your daily sort of option to drive. So just before we set off, again, one of the little things that I really like about this car is, just like say in the 488, rather than doing anything with the gear shift here to get into drive, you can just pull the front lever, the gear shift here, and you get into drive. Again, that's very much like the Ferraris, very much like a car much higher up the market like the DB11. So I really like these little touches, and it's these small things, I think, that endear you to a car. But now let's have a look at what this car is like compared to its German rivals that we have seen extensively, and whether all the hype is to be believed about the Giulia Quadrifoglio. So here we are on the road with the Giulia Quadrifoglio. It's a really tough market to battle in, this one, of the fast, small saloon or sedan. In fact, I think it's probably the toughest part of the market, just because of what buyers and journalists expect of these kind of cars. When you actually look at our expectations, they're pretty unrealistic. So a car in this market has to have the looks, it's got to look the part, it has to look mean, and it has to look intimidating from every single angle. Then it's expected to have sports car-like handling. Often these cars are compared to the 911 GTS. You want them to have the drama and the sound of a supercar, yet still maintain daily usability in terms of a comfortable suspension on bumpy roads. Yet at the same time, when you switch gear, they're meant to be as good as a sports car. These are really unrealistic and unreasonable expectations of one single car, and I can't think of any other niche in the performance car market where one car is expected to be fully sports car, fully daily, fully comfortable, mean and loud. It's a really tough market to battle in. For years the M3 ruled the roost, but it wasn't until the C63 came in 2007 that it was given a run for its money. That car had a great engine, great looks outside, but somewhat questionable handling. I mean, who can forget Clarkson having to eat the apple off the apex? So it was somewhat hit and miss as a new left field entrant. But in the decade since, AMG have now shot past with the much better C63S, leaving the M3 behind in most areas. Audi have had as many attempts as the other two, but still can't seem to reach the brilliance of the M3 and the C63. So you would expect Alfa, having been out of the game for 25 years, to have a similar hit and miss story. Good in some things, somewhat lacking in others. And boy, would you be wrong. This is so rapid. I have seldom driven anything in the last 2 years since I started this channel, or in any of my motoring life, that feels as rapid as this little Alfa does. It is so quick. It reminds me of the 488 in the way that it delivers power so suddenly once the turbos spool up. Oh, it must be the lightness as well, because the dry weight of this car is about 1500 kg, which is really light. The C63S in comparison is about 200 kg more. The M3, which was considered light, is about 150 kg more. And it comes back to Alfa focusing on power to weight ratio. You've got the same horsepower as the C63, but in a car that weighs 200 kg less. Oh, 0 to 60 is 3.9 seconds. Yes it is. I mean, it's 503 brake, but it feels like 600. It feels like the E63. I just can't fathom how fast it is. And then, we'll get onto the handling in a minute, but yeah, that is addictive. You're gonna shred tires. You're gonna shred a lot of tires. And I would not be comfortable doing this in wet conditions, because this car actually scares me. The last car that had that effect on me was the 488. And it's no surprise considering the link between Alfa and Ferrari on this car. But all straight line speed is great. Yes, you got, you know, a light body, lots of horsepower, but then it comes down to handling. And the steering on this, it is so pointy, so pointy. I've not driven anything as pointy as this. Literally, I'm not exaggerating. It almost feels too pointy. Like a little go-kart that's just gonna spin around on itself. I could point this front end anywhere and I'd only be worried about the rear going somewhere else because of how much power you got coming in. And there's a delayed reaction on the power as well. It's not quite the immediate response you get out of the C63 Top B setup. There is a delay and then whoosh, big amounts of power. Oh, it sounds really good as well. I can't seem to unhinge this car. I think you need some really, really aggressive corners and speed to unhinge it. So let's talk about the gearbox. It's a ZF8 speed like in the Aston Vantage. And as I found in that car, it's a really good gearbox. Might be a torque converter, but shifts exactly when you want it to. I'm in dynamic mode now, in manual. It's instantaneous. Sometimes a tiny bit laggy, but would have liked to have seen some F1 inspired blinky lights when it's time to change gear here in the speedometer, considering Alfa's F1 connection. The only thing that spoils the fun a bit is the brakes. They're quite spongy, and until you get used to driving through a lot of corners, only then do you understand how they react. It's a bit worse in low speed as well, but we'll get onto that. So let's talk about sound, and for that I'm going to go into race. We're going to work our way from the top down. It's got a very deep and purposeful V6 rumble. So the type of sound I was hoping from the E53, if I'm honest with you, in that 6-cylinder. It's a lot better than the M3, God. That just farts. It's quite a deep rumble, especially in race mode, but you can't really afford to be driving in race mode all the time, so we'll put it into dynamic. Again, you get the paddles going. It's a nice little musical instrument, this car. You can make it sing while remaining at decent speeds. So yeah, for me, sound is a big thing in these kind of cars. I'm addicted to the C63, so anything else would need good sound. The M4 CS I bought disappointed me on that regard, but this ticks the box. Nowhere near as good as the C63. Of course, you can't match a V8 HAL, but pretty amazing for a V6 turbo. But then when you put it down into A, as you would in comfort in a C63, everything dies. There's no sound when you're driving normally. And like I said earlier, these cars have to be everything to everyone. So in a C63, you'd press the exhaust button and you get loads of V8 rumble all the time, even if you're pottering along at 20, 30 miles per hour. You haven't got that in the Giulia. You haven't got it in the M3 really either. So this is a downside for someone like me who's used to that, who's used to not having to drive crazy to have nice sound. It's a shame because you can see the potential of the valves opening when you go into race, but you can't do that in the lower modes. I'm going to stick it in the middle setting of N, and let's talk about daily driving. Now, one thing that's really interesting about this car, like I said earlier, is how pointy the steering is, and in low speeds in daily driving, it's quite difficult to get used to. Not because it's a negative, but because no other car in this class certainly will steer like this does. So it takes a bit of getting used to. You have to minimize your steering inputs because it's going to swing either way. I think tires are going to shred in a big way when it comes to this car. I read a really good long-term test by Autocar, and they reckon about 5,000 miles. I reckon that's probably right, because it's that kind of addictive car, unlike the C63 where you can just drive along normally, get nice sound and experience. You're going to want to drive this fast to get that adrenaline rush and to be scared when you're going so quick. And that will make your tires shred. One thing I really don't like in normal driving, however, are these brakes. They're really quite uncommunicative. And when you're trying to even just come to a standstill, you have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing for the car to stop. It doesn't quite stop and you keep pushing. It's a weird feeling, and it's not something I'm used to in this class of car. It feels either like a much larger car or some kind of supercar that just does not want to stop and wants to keep going. So I think the brakes need to be worked on. I read up about the carbon ceramics. These are just the steels on this, and it's a similar story there as well. And as I said, the seats are brilliant, they're really comfortable. Pair that with really, really good suspension, and you've got a car that you can do a lot of miles in relative comfort. On top of that, I love that you can see the carbon inside the bonnet while you're driving. It's such a cool touch. So to conclude, in this exceedingly hard-fought area of the auto market, as you can tell, the Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio has really come out near the top after a 25-year break, which is incredible. For me, it makes the M3 a redundant machine for anyone but the BMW fan, which is saying something considering how that car ruled for so long. It's got a better 6-cylinder engine than the M3. The benefit that the M3 had over the others in terms of weight is lost on this lighter Giulia, and it just sounds and drives better. It hasn't got a skippy rear end. It sounds better. I said that twice because it really, really does. The tech in the M3 is much more advanced in terms of infotainment. Then you compare this to the C63 with its thunderous V8. But they're such different cars. And a lot of that is down to the weight of the Alfa. The C63 just feels a lot heavier. This feels so much lighter. And even though they have the same horsepower output, this feels quicker. It's a hard-fought battle, I think, between those two. This one, it's got a little bit better steering. The engine, the C63, has got the stronger engine. It sounds better. The power delivery is much more natural. There's no turbo lag at all. But the Alfa feels lighter. It feels more rapid when you're going along. But then the C63 now has this fantastic new interior with a digital screen in front and the bits from the Project One as well. But in character, just in driving, they're very different. I'd liken this more to the coupe version of the C63, which is more nimble. Even as Mr. AMG, I contemplate what would I be happier waking up to, a C63S or this Giulia, and I think maybe in facelift form, my bias might be pulled towards the C63, mainly because the tech and that interior along with that V8 sound. But I think I would be as happy with a Giulia, and for me that's saying something. And if we look into the future, when AMG, if rumors are to be believed, may have to give up the V8 in the C63, then it's going to be a much more even playing field for Alfa. Apart from that, there is just something so cool about a left field entrant into a hardly fought market, like the original R8 when it came out, or indeed the original C63 when it first made waves. There's just something great about a capable car that's just come out of nowhere. And in our current car climate, this is probably the one that's been the most successful at doing that. Alfa Romeo Skunk Works have built something monstrous here. It feels like a Ferrari-made C63. And it just puts such a smile on my face every time I drive it. It's really opened my eyes, and I can't wait to see what the Stelvio Quadrifoglio is like. So guys, thank you so much for watching this review on the Giulia Quadrifoglio. It's been an absolute blast. I'd love to know what you guys think of this left field entrant, because it's just so different. So please do comment below. Please like, subscribe, and share, as you always do, this video with others. I always see your comments saying, why doesn't this channel have more subscribers? You guys are doing great. Well, you can help with that. But now I'm going to do my favorite bit, turn off all the cameras, switch the car into race, and crap my pants a couple more times. See you next time.